Welcome everybody to Chevalier's Books. It's the oldest bookstore in Los Angeles. It's 81 years old. And if everybody buys a book, we can make it into our 82nd year. For a long time, people have asked, why would anybody buy a bookstore? And aside from the river of money that flows in, the answer really is demonstrated by this evening. We have a poet who is the voice of a generation and a great friend of our guest of honor here, and a woman who has written an extraordinary, poignant, well-written, smart book about life and family and love and success, and failure and triumph and resilience. This is not a book, I will say, that deserves the Washington read where you look in the index for your name or the name of your friend. This is a story of an amazing, amazing life. And I just feel so honored that we have you here tonight. So since no one came to see me, I'm going to shut up, sit down, and enjoy the evening. And thank you all for being here.
Hi, everyone. This is so exciting. I haven't done anything IRL in 2 years, actually. And this is especially exciting because Huma found out today that she is a New York Times bestseller, y'all. And Huma, it's going to be interesting to have this conversation because when we get on the phone, like, you know, those people where you're talking to someone and then all of a sudden you're like, it's been 2 hours. Yeah. So I'm going to try to make sure we reel it in. But I'm just so excited to be here, and I'm so excited to see your book in the world because I was so privileged to get an early copy, and I was like, okay, you're doing this, you're saying it, and you're putting it out there. And I felt braver after reading it. And I know that there's going to be so many young people who are also going to feel that way and feel more driven to tell their own stories. So first and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much for writing this book, truly.
Well, so I have to, I know Cleo's moderating, but I feel, you know, before 2 weeks, and Diara is my witness, right back there, I have to acknowledge Diara Ballinger, who's here. I mean, I have to acknowledge so many people because there are so many members of Hillary Land here, so I have to be very careful, Jen. But the reason I'm acknowledging Diara is I'm terrified of public speaking. It's like the thing that scares me more than anything in the world. And so I'm now doing the thing that scares me most in the world. But Diara is somebody who told me years ago, you need to be out in the world and you have a story and you should share it. And she really pushed me to do it. And I actually wanted to make a confession tonight, which is the reason I really wrote this book, is because I wanted an excuse to go into bookstores around the country. And because it is my favorite, pre-pandemic, it was my favorite thing to do. And this is my bookstore. So Bert, thank you for having me here. I'm so thrilled. Thank you to everybody at Chevalier's for having us here. And then I want to say something about this extraordinary woman who's sitting next to me, because one of the biggest themes in this book is female friendship and the power of female friendship and the idea that you can have people that you can count on. I'm staring at Jen, somebody who I count on all the time. And some of you may have noticed I was supposed to be in conversation with somebody else, and she got stuck in Africa. Her flight got delayed. And I texted Cleo last night and I said, Cleo, I don't have a moderator and will you do this? And she said yes, because that's what she does. And I felt like it's a message from God. It was meant to be for us to be in conversation because we do have this connection. And I've been such an admirer of your work. And you're such a beautiful human on the inside and the outside. And as Bert said, a voice of a generation and inspiring us the way you write, the honesty. And it is really people, you know, I went on Colbert last week and he called the book A Life in Many Words because it's so long. And it is many words, but there was an epilogue originally, Bert, that got cut, an epilogue in which I include all the women who inspired me to write my story. You were one of them. So I was honored that you did a blurb, and I can't wait to be in conversation with you. So thank you for doing this.
Okay, you cannot get choked up again because I am 10 weeks postpartum. And so if somebody starts crying, I start crying, and then we all drown in these tears. You know, why did you write this book? Because I'm so glad you did, but you certainly didn't have to.
Yeah.
And what kind of made you feel like now is the time to share this story?
Well, you know, I start the book, for those of you who've read it and who haven't read it, I start the book talking about how I grew up surrounded by stories. I loved reading. My parents were big readers. Like, this would be a tradition of our family traveling, was, you know, going to bookstores. And so I also have a belief that my dad, who died when I was young, and really to whom this book in some ways this is a love letter to my dad. And I've said this in just about every interview, is that if he was alive, I would show him this book and say, this is what I've done in my life, and I hope you're proud of me. But I really always liked being invisible. I liked being behind the scenes. I didn't, you know, want to be in the spotlight. I write a story in the book about my wedding, saying I had this really strange reaction coming down the aisle because I realized in that moment I didn't want to be the center of attention. And like, that's, you know, not usual for most brides. But I did feel, and you and I've had this conversation, Cleo, that for 2 decades, while I've been in public life, somebody else has been sharing my story, telling me what I should believe or think or do. And I realized somebody else was writing my history, and I wanted to reclaim that and tell my truth. And writing was real therapy. And I could have written this book in 2016, 2017, 2018. It would have been a different book. I think it would have been an angrier book, a much more bitter book. And I feel as though I had to get to the other side. I had to find that space. You know, the last chapter of the book is called Suffering is Optional. And I was suffering for a long time. And now to be able to share this story, I've enjoyed it so much. It's been real therapy.
You know, it's so interesting because we constantly hear things like, behind every strong woman, there's a tribe of women who have their back or her back. And you're like, okay, but what are their stories? And that's what I thought about so much in reading this book, is like, wow, you know, we think of you so much as this support system that had this woman's back, because as we all know, there's no person in no great person in a great space who got there alone, and who got there without other women, especially if they're a woman. And so it really made me think about all of the untold stories of support systems, and the tribes behind that, you know, that woman who might be the only woman in that particular room, but when they walk out of that room, they have 5 women sitting there being like, you're amazing, you know, and that I think is such an important takeaway. And I guess, you know, something you learn things even about your own friends reading their books. And I was like, okay, hold on. How did we get from Kalamazoo to Saudi Arabia to the White House? And like, I kind of would love to just have you do a brief timeline of like, how the hell we got here. Like this, it's actually crazy because I blurbed it, I read it in a really small amount of time. And I was like, this timeline is unbelievable. Like, and you just can't, it is unbelievable. And so I'd love for you to just share a little bit of that.
I have to say, I started my morning very early. And my first interview was with a man in Ireland. And the first question he asked me was like, I am trying to understand, is there a place in America called Kalamazoo, Michigan? Does this place exist? Yes, it does actually. I was born there. You know, it is one of the reasons that I do start the book with my early life, because for me, it was exploring the history of my family. I believe I'm sitting in the space with all of you, that I have been on Air Force One more times than I can count, that I've eaten in more palaces, done extraordinary things in my life. I've been in war zones, but I really owe that to the people who came before me. And, you know, I sit here as a daughter of 2 immigrant parents, an Indian father, a Pakistani mother, who left their homes in the 60s. They were Fulbright scholars. They met at the University of Pennsylvania, and they gave up everything for this, on a hope, a dream for a better life. They knew America was not perfect, but for them, it was this ideal. And they came here, and for those of you who either don't know or don't remember, that was shortly after the partition of India, which was quite convulsive. And it was not unusual, it was not usual for an Indian and a Pakistani to be married. So they actually couldn't go back to their countries. And so they got asylum in this country, got married, and then they made this deal. They were both academics, and they made this deal that where they would move to wherever they could both get jobs at university. So my dad was at Western Michigan University, and my mother was at Kalamazoo College. And so I was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I think so often about this concept of choice. And for me, my mother's side of the family, I start the book, I really share a lot about the matriarchs in my family. And I end the book on the matriarchs in my family, because my grandmother 100 years ago in India had to fight to be educated. It was considered shameful for a girl to leave her house every day to go to school. And she said, I am going to be educated. And I think about, and many of her peers, did not have that benefit. And her fighting to go to school on an ox cart, she would have to go from the rear of the house. That determination, then she passed on to my mother, who obviously, then passed this responsibility on to me. So I really do try to kind of honor that tradition. And when I was 2, my father was diagnosed with renal failure, and he was told he had 5 to 10 years and to get his affairs in order. And one of the first lines I wrote in the book is my father was told he was dying. And so he went out and he lived. And 2 months later, we moved to Saudi Arabia for 1 year. My mother likes to remind me it was a 1-year sabbatical, and every year they kept going back. And they really were so curious about the world. And so I spent my entire childhood traveling to different countries and cultures, being immersed in different spaces and places. And I think having a father who was so ill, he was also teaching us. It's funny, I'm having a conversation with you that I don't really have an opportunity to have in a lot of these interviews. I also, in part, I think he was teaching us how to live without him. So now, I have a 9-year-old, and when I was 9, I was like calling airlines and saying, can I book a flight from Jakarta to Tokyo? And my father would make me do things that terrified me. My mother would say, go out there and talk to our guests, and I would shake and say, I can't do it. But I realized that all of this prepared me, that when I walked into the White House, the 21-year-old intern, all of that experience and that perspective really informed my capacity to, I think, be a valued member of Hillaryland.
And, the drive and determination. There's a part of this book where she literally gets the internship and leaves a wedding and is all of a sudden on a plane, on a train, getting back, and you're like, huh? And it's especially in today's time, you're kind of wow, it's so awe-inspiring. And I know that even those kind of smaller stories, I think, will stick so much with young people, because you're that type of determination. And do you think that it's kind of this mix? Do you feel are you getting it from your mom? Are you getting it from your dad? Is it the culmination of the two?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I fell into public service by accident. I was going to be Christiane Amanpour, I was going to be her, because I saw her on TV during the first Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm, and I was sitting on our floor in our living room, and this face appeared on TV, and I'd never seen anybody who looked like me on TV. It was always, at least in Saudi Arabia, it was either women covered or it was, not women who looked like us. So to see something, and it is one of the things as I talk to younger women now, it's sometimes you do need to see something to believe it's possible. And so when I joined, when I went to university in Washington, I went to George Washington University. I think it in part was my curiosity about continuing to learn. I joined every student association possible, imaginable. And
real underachiever.
Yeah. And I had a friend who I met through some meetings of the Black Student Union, and her name was Ronith, and she was interning at the White House for Mike McCurry. So she came to me one day and she says, listen, if you want to be Christiane Amanpour, you need an internship for Mike McCurry. So I'm going to get you an application for a White House internship. I never thought I would actually get the internship, but I think she actually filled out most of the paperwork for me. I turn it in, go away for the summer, come back, get this internship, and then I'm disappointed to find out that I wasn't placed in Mike McCurry's office. I was placed in the First Lady's office. And I remember stepping outside in the hallway and calling my mom on those old brick cell phones and saying, Mom, I didn't get it. And she said to me then, look, maybe plan A didn't work out, but try plan B. This might be a pretty great opportunity. And boy, was she right, as moms usually are. It turned out to be pretty incredible.
I mean, being like, oh, I didn't get that internship. I got one with First Lady. And you're just like,
yeah.
God.
Yeah. I mean, it's why I write in the book. I mean, there is a lot about the White House, even though I did have to cut a lot just for length. But you know, but even when I think about it, I mean, this 21-year-old walk into the residence for the first time on that red carpet, up those marble steps, you're just immersed in history. And there's something, you just can't even describe the feeling. It is so awe-inspiring. And that really is the word. And back in the 90s, I mean, 1996, when I walked in, America was arguably the sole superpower of the world. The economy was booming. I wasn't even particularly politically, no, let me back up. I wasn't politically active. I'm not even, I say this in the book, I wasn't even sure if I was a Democrat. My parents, my family, most people, I mean, a lot of South Asians are socially and fiscally conservative. So by default, you register as a Republican, right, Roma? I mean, isn't that right? And so I fell in love. It was like a cause. I felt like important work was happening and I was kind of prepared to do whatever.
Yeah. It's one of the things I remember after I read your book, and whenever I really love something, I'm sure we're all like that, you like jump into all your group chats being like, you guys got to get this book, you got to order it, and here's why. And one of the things I remember saying to pretty much literally anyone in my phone, I was like, what you don't realize is that Huma, and almost in some of the most iconic or just unbelievable times in in the United States history in the past 25 years, you were in the room, and almost every time you're almost every time one of the only brown people in the room, and pretty much every time the only Muslim woman in the room. And I'd really love for you to speak to that experience, because I know that so many people, women have so many experiences of being maybe the only woman in the room, and people of color have so many experiences of being the only person of color in the room. But it's like, in those moments, I was like, she was just always there. And that was what was really struck me about the book, is just that, did you feel lonely? Did you feel alone in that? Did you feel spirited by that in the sense of like, it just gave you something to kind of motivated you to want to open doors? What does that do for you, and what does it do to you?
I think I now call it the before time. I mean, I walked into this space and an environment with people who were so interested, and to the point that you made, there weren't a lot of people who looked like me when I walked in, and there were certainly no Muslims. And so I actually found the opposite. I found that people were really interested in my cultural traditions, my faith traditions. What is this about fasting? And they would go to events on the state floor, and my boss would come back and say, "Isn't it time? Aren't you supposed to eat something? It's sundown." This real curiosity and comfort. And I actually found that I had a lot of, I was happy to share and excited to share. And I think there was something about being in the Clinton administration. There was an understanding that the way to better bilateral relationships around the world is to engage. I mean, back then there was an active Middle East peace process. I mean, Bill Clinton was involved in the Northern Ireland, peace talks. I was out of the country on behalf of my country more than I was here in those White House years. And I really give them credit. It was the entire environment. And in fact, I recount a story where I was in Amsterdam preparing for a trip for the First Lady, and it was announced that King Hussein of Jordan died. And I don't know if anybody remembers King Hussein of Jordan, but for somebody growing up in the Middle East, like he was a larger than life, like really, really almost revered character. And I'm, you know, so I get the news and I'm, you know, really trying to process it. And one of my colleagues calls me over and she says, pack your bags. You're coming with us to the funeral. And so here I am, 22-year-old, we're landing in Amman, Amman, Jordan. I pray, participate in the funeral prayer. I mean, it was like these little acts that for me were like just so profound. But I do think that's one of the reasons why there was so much success in that administration in terms of expanding the seats at the table. The very first thing I did on behalf of, you know, the administration I was working for, I was sent to greet the newly elected Prime Minister of Bangladesh and first woman. And I recount shaking, like feeling lightheaded. I'm in the diplomatic reception room, which is the center room of the, you know, in the center of the most important house in the world. And you're and receiving a head of state on behalf of the President of the United States. I mean, there were so many pinch me moments. I mean, there were crazy moments too. See, now everybody will be like, oh, you were so great. We loved you. But I mean, it was definitely also a sink or swim environment too. Like you got tossed into the deep end. So I do recount the stories of my first trip to New York City, traveling with Hillary Clinton as First Lady and the President. Nobody told me that when a president travels, there is more than one helicopter. Marine One is just one helicopter. So when you're little old me and you're on the fourth helicopter and your helicopter lands first and you have to take everything off, well, your helicopter takes off so that Marine One can land. And as Marine One was landing, the hanging bag that I was responsible for, that had Hillary Clinton's suit that she was supposed to wear the next day at the United Nations, gets tossed into the air and flung into the East River. And I run inside and call the man. He brings a broom out and fishes her suit as they're landing. And thankfully they didn't see it. She didn't find out. I mean, we managed to get it to dry clean and she wore the suit the next day. And I told her only 10 years later. So we had crazy things happen. You know, in fact, I was just doing an interview when somebody said, is it true you used to hide clothes that you thought were ugly? And I was like, yes, I did. So there we did have a lot of really fun. I recount a story in the book where she overslept. It was during the Senate campaign and I had to go wake her up and I didn't know how to do it. And nobody told me how to do it. So I wandered into their bedroom and saying I had to figure out how not to wake up the leader of the free world and wake up the candidate. And guess what? I woke up the entire complex. It was so bad. So it was just so much fun, crazy, and also just, yeah.
But you know, it was really sweet to be able to witness her mentorship or womentorship, if you will, with you, because there's so many moments where you feel her gentle encouragement and you feel the way that she kind of could, you know, we all need those people who see our potential when we're still in a space of being afraid of our own potential, you know? So it's like, whether that's your mom saying, go say hi to our guests, or the president, the first lady saying, you know, go greet them, or, you know, go in the, you know, and it's just, I thought that was so beautiful. And I did wonder, you know, did you have a download with her after she read the first draft of this book? You know, what was like, don't we all want to know the feedback? You know, what was it like when she got your book and, you know, she reads about everything? Because even, you know, when you break down so much of what was going on in your personal life and your marriage during the time, it's still all in the backdrop of what is going on with the campaign. Yeah. And that to me was also like, you know, I mean, the fact that we didn't constantly witness like a full public breakdown, I mean, your strength through that time, because for, you know, one of those things happening at a time would have broken so many people. And for you to maintain and be a pillar of strength to someone and, you know, to, you know, your team who needed you, that was something I was so personally in awe of. And, you know, but what was it like? What was it like after she read, you know, what were her words to you after she read this book?
So she didn't have many, but I will say, I mean, so there's so much that you just said I want to respond to, because there is a whole chapter in this book called Hillary Land. And I write about it, and the way I try to write about Hillary, and in recent days as I'm doing these interviews, I'm getting a lot of questions, no disrespect, but like only from men who are like, how come you're not more critical of Hillary? And what I really tried to do in this book is not tell stories about Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or Anthony. I just show people what it was like. What I try to take people into the room with me, onto the airplane, at home at night, like what did it feel like, what it was like. And the reason Hillary
Tell your story, by the way.
Thank you. Yes.
Give me a break.
Yes.
You're like,
Yes, telling it from my perspective and how I felt, and not, what she felt and why she did these things. And because I was raised professionally in Hillary Land, I took certain things for granted. And I haven't had this conversation with anybody else so far, but oftentimes when I'm very honest about it in the book, like when I was competing with other young women for jobs, and we're constantly, trying to best each other. The one thing about Hillary, and maybe I didn't even end up putting this in the book, was that she never seemed afraid of other women's power. Like she always thought there were enough seats at the table and that we would just pull more chairs up. And a lot of, women don't do that. And she did have this ability to identify talent in other people. I tell a story in the book in 2016, when I'm sitting in a car next to her, and we were running late for an event in Colorado. And she turns to me and she says, oh, I might not make it to this last 2 stops. So I might have to do one event and you may have to go and speak for me at the other event. And I'm sitting next to her and I want to throw up. And I'm hoping that 24 hours turns into 26 hours. So there's time for her to do both events. But the point being, she believed in me more than I believed in myself. I did not think I could sit up in this chair and construct sentences that made sense, but she did. And she did that all the time. She would look at somebody's writing, an intern's writing, and say, well, Dan Schwerin is really good. Dan Schwerin should write more. And guess what? Dan Schwerin went on to ghostwrite 2 New York Times bestselling books. To have somebody believe in that, believe in you rather. And I write this in the Hillary Land chapter. Hillary Land is a club. It's a club that comes with lifetime membership. And, the only scars are doing battle in the roughest game in town. And you can call anybody in Hillary Land after 20, 30, whatever years and say, I need you. My collaborator is a member of Hillary Land. And, when I was struggling with the book, just vomiting on paper and had no guidance, I called somebody from Hillary Land and said, I need your help. But she said, yes. And so for me, having that sort of sense of community has been really amazing. I did send her an early version of the book. And I said, listen, I'll cut out anything you don't like or anything you don't want. And I figured that would help with the length because it was so long. And she didn't ask me to cut out a single thing. Now, she did say a couple of times in the margins, which was very cute to, I've saved pictures of this. And she'll write, this is very funny. Or I don't remember this. I recount a scene in the book, and this is something, maybe because I'm in conversation with my sister, I'm thinking of these stories that no one else has asked me or I volunteer, but I recount a story in the book during impeachment, during a really hard time, for those of us who worked at the White House, and I think for a lot of our country. And I was just starting out as traveling with Hillary, and I didn't know if I was doing a good job. I was terrified and I was really intimidated by her. And it's the end of a long night and everyone's asking her questions. They need this, they need that, they need this. And we're at a dinner party and we're in Washington and it's the last event. And we've had, 15 things and, Ken Starr is making 16 announcements the next morning. And the hostess comes up to me and says, is the first lady going to eat? Are you going to make her a plate of food? And I'm 22, I'm like, I have no idea, but she hasn't eaten all day. So I went up to her and I said, do you want food? And she says, I'm going to go get a plate myself. And she picks up the plate, contemplates for a second, and then just puts the plate back down and says to nobody in particular, and the room is empty, this is not working. And in that moment, I'm thinking, oh my God, I just lost my job. I mean, this is horrible. I don't even know what to say. And I'm shaking, and we get in the motorcade, and the entire ride back, I'm thinking, all I want to do is, please this woman, help her. She's going through such a difficult time. And we get to the South Portico, and I stay back, and the usher comes running out and says, the First Lady is requesting you. I go inside, and just think about, in the midst of like our entire party collapsing, she gives me a hug and says, I'm so sorry for what I just said. It's just such an impossibly difficult time. And I hope you don't think this is a reflection on your work. I really value what you do, and I don't tell you enough. And in that moment, I'm thinking the empathy that she has for this kid who has no idea what they're doing. And to me, it just reveals so much about her. Now, she does say she doesn't remember this. So you know what we did? She's like, did I do that? I don't remember. So we found the pictures that the White House photographer took, capturing all these moments. And so now she's like, okay, fine, keep it in. But it was a joy. It was a joy sharing the book with her.
I don't know how many of you have read the book yet, but there are so many stories like that. And you feel like all of a sudden you're 22 and you're nervous. Like there were certain stories where you're like, I remember sweating when I was like, the carpet bag did not just go into the water, it's in the river. How'd they get it out? And they get it out with a broom, and it feels, you did such an amazing job transporting us to those memories. But I think it's because there's so much love there, and there's so much respect there. And and there's so much you get into, and I've been watching, just kind of being on the sidelines cheering this past week while you've done this press run. And I have noticed everyone wanting to talk about your marriage, and I was really taken, and I was saying this to you before we got on, that it's always it's every time it's with a woman, you can write your whole damn life story in this zillion-page book. You will treasure every page that's not a disc, because it's good. And I would read those, everything you cut, whatever's on the floor, I would still love to read. Only a freaking woman, your face on the cover. It's your book. It's your story. It starts out when you were a child. It goes through your family. It goes through, you are working for arguably one of the most important women in US history, during some of the most critical times. And they're like, so what about your husband? And I don't want to ask about your husband. You can read about him. And through your lens and your experience. And I honestly think that I was so happy when you did write about it, because I know it will help so many women. And I know that it will help so many people who feel that they're in a space where there is no right decision. And those are things we have to all come to grips with, is, there's no way to be a perfect mother and deal with an impossible situation at the same time. And that was such an incredible takeaway. What I'd really love to know is how it's been to have such a focus point, or such a headline be this man during your book tour, and during talking about your story. And, what's that been like this week?
It has been, I guess, look, maybe this is really cliche. I do believe things in life happen for a reason. And so whatever happened to me happened for a reason. And for me, it is one of the reasons I wrote the book. This notion that what I think I went through, I don't think is, unfortunately, singular. I think, this is just a reality in our life, in our world. And I just think the difference is I had to do it on the front page of the newspapers. And I did feel for a lot of that period judged for every decision I made. I did tune out the outside world while I was going through it. I tried to make every decision that was in that moment the right decision for me. And people often forget. You said the word mother. I think it is so different when you are a mother. The first time Anthony's story broke, I was not even 12 weeks pregnant. I was carrying his child. And when you read the book and you learn about my relationship with my father, I didn't have a choice when I lost my dad. And so to know you have life growing inside of you, and knowing that you can if you have the capacity to create a family home for this child, you did. And that was certainly my reaction. I have been surprised at how intense the interest has been in him. And but I wonder if it's just that this story is just also very relatable. And to some extent, and no one's asked me this, but I think part of it is a lot of people, at least in New York, feel as though Anthony is sort of this, this character that has befuddled people. Like, how are you, taking people back to 2009 when Anthony and I got married? I mean, I couldn't walk down the street in New York without somebody stopping him and saying, thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for championing, our needs as his constituents in New York. He was so vibrant. He was so attractive. He was so charismatic. I mean, he really was in my view, the perfect man. So maybe there was, some, but I do resent it sometimes because I do feel like I have my own story, and it's one of the reasons why I've chosen. And I talked to Anthony before I wrote the book, and I told him I plan to tell my full truth, and he said, you are entitled to write whatever you want to write, because that's what I've done. And in the end, as you'll get through, there is a happy ending, but we do not with Anthony. I mean, there's just there's a happy ending for me.
There's a happy ending because it's not with Anthony.
But we had to go through this experience together, and a really, a very difficult and hard place. And for me, I had to turn to, I had to face my demons. I had to do the hardest thing. I had to do the work with Anthony. We had to go through this process, which was brutal. And the number of people, Cleo, that I have heard from, I mean, I was talking to somebody in the car on the way over here. It is just, you don't have to be on the front page of the papers to feel judged, to feel that shame, to feel alone in your decision, whatever that is. And am I making the right choice? I think that is, a much more common. So if it's a service I can do, I can share, I'm really happy to do that. And I don't wish him any ill will. I feel as though I didn't really understand a lot about mental health and addiction. I didn't know. Was I in the dark, but anybody who knows me these past 2 weeks has said there's a lightness and sort of an unburdening, a liberation. And maybe that is finally being out there on my own. And maybe I was scared, maybe some extent is that maybe I was scared to do that for a long period of time.
I think we're also familiar with either being that person or having someone in our lives who's been the person where a man did something and somehow the woman is judged for, or, the man's behavior. And this period. And it was for some reason, everything he did was all about you, and it was somehow your fault. And I remember talking to you about this when you, put so much of this relationship in the book. And you said to me, you were like, people will judge me for staying or trying, but no one who's judging me has to look at my child in the eyes when they're older. And we'll have to say to them, I did everything I could to help and save your dad. And I did everything I could to create an environment where you could have both of your parents in the same house. And I just remember my heart breaking when I heard that, because I was like, we get so hijacked by these headlines, this thing, or, oh my gosh, this happened. And it's so dramatic and it's so intense. And you're like, oh my God, there's a kid here. And there's a kid's father here. And there's a mother who doing what women are constantly freaking doing, is the backbone to everything, being and De'Ara and I were talking about this in the car right here. We were like, when you are the person who there's no one else who's going to try to keep this unit together because you don't want your kid inheriting your issues. You don't want them, inheriting these traumas, and you're just trying to do your best to keep your family going. And, I'm so grateful you wrote about it, because I know that it's going to save so many women who are struggling in the shame of a man's actions while trying to hold a family together.
Yeah, I appreciate your mentioning that. I mean, you remember everything we talk about. It's impressive. We did have that conversation. I mean, there are 2 chapters in this book, and one is shame, shame, go away, and the other one is elephant in the room. And she's right. I mean, I lived in shame for a very long time. And I felt, I went from, being the girl who counted, on her friends and just assumed they were always going to be there, to being told you're not welcome at the party. And I recount the story in the book where even, taking my son to swim and him being with his dad, a woman comes up to me and says, "Shame on you." And I accepted it for a while, but finally was, I powered through that, because I do think you do take all the incoming from the outside, and it does affect your mental health and your emotional health. And I was finally done. I really did get to a place where I decided to just, I was always out in the world. I mean, I was silent, but I was out in the world, but I was not willing to allow that the treatment from the external world to, basically slowly kill me. So it was a great part of my therapy, actually.
Well, we're grateful for it. Thank you. I want to open it up to Q&A because I got a little card in the back that said Q&A.
Really? Already?
I knew it would fly. So if anyone has a question.
Oh, hey, Bert.
First of all, beyond fantastic, I'm so grateful to do this for us. So wonderful. So I have an observation and then a question. I promise you. I found the book poignant in so many places, very emotional for me when you describe the role of your dad, future death, your mother's role, sort of strength. And when I introduced you, I talked about what I call the story of resilience. And part of it is the manner in which you reached a kind of modus vivendi with your former husband, or Jordan, with a wife that he's leading will lead. And I wondered what role you as a parent attribute to the parenting that you received as you.
Well, my dad always told me that our eyes are in the front of our head for a reason, and that is to stay focused on the future. And even though he really encouraged me to study history, it wasn't to become a history teacher, it was to understand the past so that it could inform my, the decisions I made in the future. I 100%, when people say to me, like, how are you so resilient? I can't remember if the story stayed in the book, but oh no, it did. I tell the story of when my father was 21 and he was riding a horse, and he was thrown from the horse, and he, the bar that he was meant to clear, actually broke the fall. And after 7 days of him sort of crawling around, his friends took him to the doctor, and the doctor was like, "How have you been walking around on a broken back for a week?" I mean, like, he just had this strength of, will. And it's actually a story I've shared towards the end of the book. On the other side of my journey, as I was really learning all the lessons of like how to reemerge in the world, I took Jordan back to Saudi Arabia, to our family home in 2018. It was 26 years after my father died. And my dad, after he was diagnosed with renal failure, did get a transplant, thanks to my mother, Bert. I always say my father was like this amazing human being, but she aided and abetted that illusion. She made everything possible. He gets his transplant, and then after he died, my mom saved everything. Our house was Miss Havisham's house. But in 2018, I take Jordan back, and I start going through my dad's closet so we can start giving away his things. And I pull out, I find his undershirts, and all of them have stains, blood stains in the back, which I had never noticed as a little girl. But to me, the lesson essentially was my father was always immaculately dressed. He was always smiling. He had the most optimistic outlook on life. And so to me, like, that was his final lesson, to, find joy and hope despite the pain, is I think one of the best lessons that he left for me. And I think he and my mom, and I try to do this with Jordan, this notion of they really let us choose how we wanted to be in this world. They only had one requirement, and that is you be educated. You can do whatever you want, but you got to be educated. And I think that sense of it's your choice. I recount stories in the book where like, I don't know what the right choice is. And, you know, wandering down to my dad's office, what should I do? What should I not do? But in the end, you know, that's how our parents raised us, was to live in this world and to, you know, have the, you know, I tell this story, I think in every talk, is my dad loved plants. And he would tell us that people are like plants, and a plant is only as good as its roots. If you nourish the soil, take care of the roots, the plant's going to be okay. Rainstorm, it's going to be okay. So as long as you don't forget your roots, you're going to be okay. And I think that stayed with me in through everything I went in my adult life, all the extraordinary things and the amazing things and the crazy things.
You know, it's just really interesting to hear you say the story about the shirt, because the book is called Both and we do live in a culture where it's really hard to say that two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible. The internet will not allow it. And so to even have this book with this book title and telling stories about, you know, being immaculately dressed and full of joy and having blood on the back of your shirt, and those two things, the pain and the joy being present at the same time, those two things being true, I think is so typifying of so much of your story, and obviously your book title and everything. Just a little comment there. But someone has some questions. I'm not gonna take up any more space.
Hi, Huma. Hi, Theo. My name is Andres. I'm from Arizona, and I saw you in 2008 in my hometown of Tucson, Arizona, on a campaign stop with Hillary. And you talked about Hillary Land. I was about Huma Land because I was just obsessed with you then.
Oh my God, this is so. I did not tell him to say any of this. Thank you so much.
And 10 years after that, I became the youngest Latino and the youngest LGBT lawmaker in the state house. And it's you. Inspired that. And I think, you know, there are so many communities that are marginalized, that are still not represented in elected office. And I think they still need to hear about what Huma thinks in those conversations, because we need to keep moving the needle, and we're still far behind, right?
I first of all, I'm so proud of you, and you know, thank you for representing in the way that you're representing, because I do think that you just nailed it. I mean, I recount a story in the book in 2007 when Hillary was running for president. We were at a campaign meeting and somebody said, we need more diversity on the plane. And so I raised my hand. Diara, you're gonna love this. Were you around? No, you know the story. Of course she knows the story. And I raised my hand, I'm like, wait, what about me? And the response was, you don't count. And that was true. Objectively, that was true. In 2007, to be Muslim or Arab or South Asian didn't count electorally or politically. We weren't voting in numbers that made differences, and certainly not in battleground states. So for me, the idea that Diana's laughing because she remembers, the idea that in 2020, two things, Joe Biden winning places like Arizona, the margins being so narrow in certain places, there is research that now shows that South Asians, I shouldn't say South Asians, Asian community voted in large enough numbers in certain states to actually make a difference. They did count. The point is participating and, you know, activating, and obviously coupled with our vice president. I mean, the notion that history needs to be acknowledged, honored, repeated over and over again, because I mean, she was a first of many things before she was a first, you know, vice president, female vice president with African-American, South Asian, and that needs to be remembered. And so I always tell young people, do the thing that scares you the most, show up, you know, participate, because it does make a difference. You did it. Thank you for that comment.
Hi, I'm so glad I came. As soon as I saw the advertisement, I have to go. And see it. I don't know you that much. I just heard your story, and it's so inspiring. And I really want to read it, and I look forward to it. The one thing I was afraid to come because I didn't want to have reconfirm my feelings about her. You know, and get disappointed again about what happened. But what I'm happy about when this was happening, I always wondered who had her back. And I'm glad to know that there were people that had her back.
Oh my gosh,
So, you know, Marlene, is that what your name is, Marlene? I hope that when people close this book and walk away, and it is one of the reasons I wrote the book, and clearly, as you can tell, there were many reasons, but it was one of the main reasons I wrote this book, is that you will take away that this woman, this inhuman, because I really try and describe her with her full humanity, would have been an extraordinary president of the United States, like person, not woman, like she was the most qualified person, full stop, period, in my opinion. And I wanted to honor her in that way. I write in the acknowledgements, to some extent, the entire book was a thank you to her for her service. And she's gonna, she made history in 2008 for women and girls in this country forever. I always it kind of annoys me that sometimes people forget. When I first sent the book out to early readers, not any early readers in this room, so definitely not Cleo. But some young women came back and said, oh my gosh, can you write more about 2008? I didn't know she ran. I thought it was Obama
So it just almost fell out of their chair.
Oh, no. And I was like, no, you're super uninformed. And this other young woman raised her hand on the Zoom. She's like, I also had no idea she ran. I said, not only did she run, she made history for you. And look, I want to be optimistic. I'm going to be optimistic, but it is still hard. I mean, look what happened in 2020. A slate of well-qualified women ran. It's hard. Actually, when you look at it, you realize kind of it's sort of miraculous what Hillary Clinton managed to do. So I hope you enjoy the read.
I'm looking forward to it, and I'm gonna send it to my daughter. And can I make one more comment? I was volunteering for the Women's Caucus in Chicago.
Yeah.
In the Democratic Convention, and she spoke, and I went, there's my president.
Oh my God,
And I
wait.
went, there's my president, and it was in Chicago.
So this was, no,
Or in Denver,
no, 96. No, she's talking about one of the 96. That's
Yeah,
one of the
I
others,
was there,
96.
and I was a volunteer, and I was holding the mic for everybody.
Oh
You know,
my
I asked
God.
a question, and I listened to her, and I went, and I'm getting chills now, so there's my president.
My God, seriously?
Yeah, and she was so great, and I got a picture with her, she loved my earrings.
Wait, so you're pre-me? I wasn't even at the Denver convention in 1996.
It was like
Oh, sorry, Chicago. I meant to say Chicago. She said Denver. Yes. I was not there in 96.
Yeah, she was, anyway, I'm just happy she had it with us, especially talking about women, when you hit her outfit that you.
Oh my God, yeah.
Now, that's a friend.
And we all have that
Oh my
friend.
gosh. I just want to say, you were talking about working so hard to bring her humanity into, that chapter.
Yeah.
And I just, hearing you talk, I feel that you represent the humanity that I want to see everyone have in this world. And I just want so badly for, I think if you could say, I think you answered it, which is that your parents took you everywhere.
Yeah.
And so this idea of seeing ourselves in the other,
Yes.
which is where we need to be right now.
I agree.
I just want to know, will you run for president?
Oh, I did my first interview, Sion's making a thing back there, but she's saying, no, she's not. I did my first live, I don't know how you do this, but I did my first live morning show on the Today Show last week. And I was so nervous, I was shaking. First of all, it's freezing. They keep these studios at very cold temperatures to ensure you're uncomfortable is my new theory. And so one of the other women in the collection with Cleo is Shonda Rhimes. And so I decided I was gonna steal Shonda's approach when she wrote her memoir. She said, this is my year of saying yes. And so I totally screwed up, and Savannah's like, so what's next for you? I said, oh, it's my year of saying yes. She's like, so you're gonna run for office? I said, yes, no. And it's no, I don't think I would ever, I don't think I would. Yeah. I will say this, if there is a woman running for president and she asked me to help her, I would sign up immediately, but I'm kind of like enjoying, I like author. I'm kind of in this author space for now, at least for this week.
Well, and I think what is so beautiful about your story is that it shows that we all have a place You know, we
Yeah.
all have a place and a space for making the world better.
Yeah.
And it's not always having to be the person who's in the center of the spotlight every single time. There's something for everyone to do and contribute. And I think that, especially in this kind of fame hungry Instagram eyeballs, TikTok eyeballs culture that we are raising our kids in, to tell them, like, you know, there's activism comes in all different shapes and forms. It's not Gloria Steinem or bust. It's not Hillary Clinton or bust. It looks like Huma, it looks like DR, and it looks like you, and it looks like all of us recycling, saying hi to our neighbors, doing what we can with what we've got wherever we are.
Yeah, yeah. That's
All
right.
right, last question, and then I guess we have to wrap it up, right? Okay.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm the principal of an all-girls public charter middle school. And my last IRL book event was with you.
Oh my gosh.
So, asked the question, and they also gave me my card, because the back of it has our affirmation, which begins with, I know who I am, I know that I matter, and I know what matters to me. And we say it as a whole school every morning. And it's middle school, so this is 11, 12, and 13. So for two amazing women, you actually, both of your names are on our sheet road wall. What would you go back and say to your own middle school selves, or what message can I bring home to my students tomorrow, to Friday?
I think for me, I would say do the thing that scares you the most. And it's probably worth it. And I'm doing the thing that scares me most right now. And the other thing I always say to young people, because I did not follow this advice, my dad always told me a good life is a balanced life, and I did not have a balanced life. And I think it is really important to have a balanced life. And so that I do think this generation is better about that than at least my generation. But those are my two pieces.
And what's your favorite skincare product?
My skincare products, I couldn't even tell you. What do you mean, like my face cream?
Favorite face oil, cream,
I
like your ride or die toner. Oh my gosh.
She's like totally putting me on the spot. I'm sort of embarrassed to say I kind of like use whatever they send me in gift packages. Is that terrible? So I'm on Tracy Martin right now.
It's practical.
Practical, right?
I would just say I went to a 100-year-old birthday party one year, and I asked him, and it was actually right around the time of the 2016 election. And I said, what would be your advice for the times we're living in? And he said, as someone who had lived through, World War II, civil rights, depression, the Great Depression, he said, be good to as many people as possible. And your book is a testament to that. And the sisterhoods you built around it, the coalitions you built around it, the friendships. There's so many, you can tell half of this room are friends of hers. So, thank you for being good to as many people as possible and being like Hillary and always trying to bring people along the way. I'm so grateful you wrote this book. I'm so grateful to all of you for showing up, and thank you to this amazing bookstore.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
I so love this conversation. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you so much.